In a stormy atmosphere, the two men walked on their way to a house near the lake. When they entered the house, they took off their coats. One of them was wearing an appearance of prestige and dignity with the elegant uniform he was wearing and the black leather bag he was carrying. As for the other person, he was wearing worn-out clothes like the one he was wearing. Peasants and cattle herders used to wear it, and a short conversation took place between them. "Mr. Doctor, the girl's condition is getting worse. Please help her." The doctor adjusted his glasses and continued, saying, "What is the patient complaining about, and how long has she been suffering from the disease?" "She fell ill a few days ago, but her health deteriorated quickly, which caused our concern, and that is why we asked you to come here quickly. But you did not tell me about the symptoms of her illness. The matter is very complicated and I cannot describe it, so I ask you to be kind enough to see it for yourself." The girl's condition was strange, which terrified the doctor. The door of the room opened and the two men entered. The doctor's eyes fell on a girl sleeping on the bed. Traces of illness and exhaustion appeared on her face. The doctor came forward to examine her, and it did not take long until he was certain that what this girl was suffering from was something he had never seen in his entire professional career, and that it was supernatural. The bed was shaking violently, as if there were invisible hands moving it, and the girl's temperature rose and fell suddenly and quickly. He also noticed that her body was swelling in different parts and then returned to normal, as if there were rats or snakes moving under her skin. The doctor felt terrified and he quickly left the room after giving her a sedative, and the two men sat in front of the fireplace talking. "What is your diagnosis of her condition, sir?" "I don't know what to tell you, but I think you should show her to a cleric. Perhaps she is possessed by demons." Al-Tayyib left the house, leaving the man confused and afraid that the family's matter would be exposed and it would become the talk of the village, and this is what actually happened. Who is this girl and what is her story? The events of this story took place between the years 1878 to 1879 AD in a small village called Amherst, which is located in the province of Nova Scotia in the state of Canada, when Esther Cox, an 18-year-old orphan teenage girl, moved to live in the house of her sister, Olivia Ted, and her husband, Daniel, even though their house was. It was crowded with Daniel's children and Daniel's brothers and sisters, but Esther was welcomed and accepted among them, and she lived happily among them like any large, poor family whose peace was not disturbed by poverty and the hardship of living. But something happened in Esther's life. Her heart beat for the first time for love. While she was herding the livestock, Esther saw one of the young men of the village strutting in his walk, and it seemed from his appearance and elegant clothes that he was from a rich family. Esther fell in love with him, and Bob McNeil sensed this and began to get closer to her, giving her flowers and gifts, and they began to meet near the lake. Esther did not know that she was just an innocent butterfly caught in a web of that cunning spider. During one of the sessions, McNeil tried to approach her in a rude manner, and when she tried to push him away from her, he pulled his gun from his pocket and threatened her with it. Esther felt shocked, but she gathered her strength and kicked him with her foot. She fled to her home. She did not tell anyone what had happened to her. She went up to her room and closed the door on herself. Perhaps Esther needed some time to sit with herself and blame her for how naive she was to be deceived by that young man with his sweet words and to cry over her false love that was not destined to last. The wheel of class differences between the rich and the poor crushed him and reduced him to ashes that were scattered by the wind. It did not take long until Esther was able to pull herself together and return to her normal life, but mysterious things and events began to appear in that house and were linked to her presence, and the first of those events was when she went to sleep in her bed and everyone heard creaking and noises being made from under the bed, which led them to believe that there was a nest of mice because of Esther's filth and her failure to clean the bottom of the bed, and she became the subject of ridicule from all family members, but the laughter of ridicule soon turned into screams of terror when they discovered that that noise was not caused by rats, but from hidden forces. Shake the bed violently. The matter developed when Esther developed a strange fever. Sometimes her temperature rose, and at other times her body turned into what looked like a piece of ice. This is in addition to a strange swelling that appears and then disappears all over her body, and after the doctor examined her, he suggested to her family that her condition be presented to the church so that the clergy could decide whether this was a case of demonic possession or a form of insanity. The family hesitated a lot before telling the church, as news like this would cause a huge uproar and they might be harmed and expelled by the villagers because of the presence of a witch in their house. The clergy were more understanding of the sensitivity of the situation and had pledged to keep the matter secret, and in a semi-dark room with light interspersed with it, she was frightened by the oil lamp installed on one of the walls. 3 priests stood around the bed on which Esther was sleeping, and the eldest of them began reading some texts from the Bible, and the other sprinkled the girl with some drops of holy water, while the third man contented himself with standing and observing what was happening so that he could write it down in a book. He was carrying him, and terrifyingly, the corners of the bed began to shake until they were almost torn from their place, and Esther's body began to swell and she began to writhe on the bed in movements that the most skilled athletes could not perform. As a scratching sound was heard above Esther's head, someone pointed with a trembling finger towards the front of the wooden bed where the girl lay her head, and the words "Esther Cox, you are mine, I will kill you" appeared. The events escalated, and objects began to fly in the air, as if there were invisible hands raising them and throwing them. The ceiling of the room almost collapsed on them, and violent knocking sounds were heard, as if someone was hitting with axes and shovels, which prompted the clerics to leave. Quickly, signs of horror and astonishment appeared on their faces. The story of Esther and her demonic possession quickly became the talk of the villagers, who heard the disturbing sounds coming from the family hut. In December, Esther contracted diphtheria and was transferred to her sister's house in the village of Sackville in Brunswick County to receive treatment. During the 2 weeks she spent there, the symptoms of demonic possession disappeared until everyone thought she had been cured. After she recovered, Esther returned to her home with. Upon her return, the strange phenomena reappeared again and were more severe than before, and her family noticed fires breaking out in the shack for no reason, and what increased their terror was when Esther told them that she had seen that demon who had appeared to her in a dream and threatened her that he would burn the house if you don't leave it. In January 1879 AD, Esther was forced to move from her home to live with a local family. Despite this, the phenomena did not disappear completely, and Esther became a source of controversy and astonishment for everyone who heard or met her. In late March, Esther traveled to the city of St. John, which is close to her village, in response to the invitation of a number of researchers into paranormal phenomena who decided to meet her to study her case closely. There, Esther sat on a wooden bench in the middle of the hall, and a number of researchers surrounded her. During her interrogation, Esther suffered an epileptic fit, but she responded by humming and tapping her feet on the ground. Then she spoke briefly, as if she was reciting poetry or something similar to the lyrics of rap songs. Among what was understood from her words was that the one possessing her was a ghost called Bob Nickel. He was a shoemaker. In addition to mentioning many names such as Peter Cox and Maggie Fisher, no one understood their relationship with him. Are they ghosts too, or are they his relatives? After that interview, Esther was subjected to skepticism from those present. Amidst the confusion and commotion that rose in the hall, one of the attendees approached Esther, introducing himself as Mr. Walter Hubble, an actor and researcher in strange phenomena, and that he was ready to visit her at her home to conduct further research. Esther was pleased with his invitation and expressed her acceptance. To visit him, but she did not return to her home and spent some time on the Van Amberg's family farm, which is located near the village of Amherst. Then she returned to her home in June 1879 AD, where the strange events escalated again, and this was accompanied by the arrival of Mr. Walter Hubble, who decided to spend a few weeks at her home to closely monitor her condition and write a book telling her story. During his time at her side, Walter witnessed many strange events in the house, including fires that broke out for no reason from time to time, objects moving and disappearing, and then appearing in other places, in addition to Esther's epileptic seizures and swelling of her body from time to time. And what confirmed to him the truth of what she was saying was that he was watching her the whole time and was sure that she had no hand in what was happening. She was also exposed to physical harm after that satanic entity attacked her with sharp tools such as pins and knives. Despite her tragic situation, Walter Hubble tried to convince Esther to perform theatrical performances that showed the strange things that happened to her in exchange for sums of money, but she refused for fear of being accused of witchcraft and sorcery, and preferred to work in a horse stable owned by Mr. Arthur Davison, and she did not. A month passed until a massive fire broke out, consuming the barn, and fingers were pointed at Esther, who was arrested by the police and sentenced to 4 months in prison, of which she served 1 month after the owner of the barn later pardoned her. The strange thing is that after her release from prison, the strange events began to decrease little by little until they disappeared completely, and Esther returned to her normal life. She even married twice and gave birth to a son. Then she traveled to the city of Rockton in the American state of Massachusetts with her second husband, and she died on November 8, 1912. 52 years old. Despite the strangeness of Esther's story, she has become forgotten and no one remembers her anymore. The credit for transmitting her story goes to Mr. Walter Hubble, who wrote a book telling her story, which achieved great success and sold 55,000 copies. Was Esther telling the truth, or did she fabricate these events to gain sympathy for her? Esther was subjected to a severe emotional shock when the person she loved tried to rape her. As a result, Esther entered into a state of nervous breakdown that caused her to become isolated from her family. A huge negative energy formed around her that attracted dark, satanic entities towards her. It is known that these entities are attracted to negative emotions such as fear and extreme sadness. As for Western phenomena, such as objects flying in the air, physical changes, and starting fires, Mr. Walter Hubble, who was a witness to these events, confirmed that Esther was close to him when the fires occurred, and he saw with his own eyes the repeated attacks that Esther was subjected to with knives, which left severe wounds on her body. The funny thing is that the strange events disappeared after Esther was released from prison, as if that devil had behaved and received his punishment. If we analyze the matter logically, perhaps Esther's imprisonment was a shock to her that removed the shock of the attempt to rape her. Some may say that this girl tried to draw attention to herself by fabricating that story in collusion with the writer Walter Hubble to achieve financial gains, but if we look closely and go back in time to that period of time, we will know that whoever claims such stories is destined for isolation and people avoid them out of fear. From the curse, he may have been imprisoned and killed on charges of witchcraft and sorcery, as happened more than 200 years ago when many women were killed and burned on charges of witchcraft and sorcery. Perhaps Esther had vital or electromagnetic energy that was released when she felt angry or sad, and this is not unlikely, as we hear from time to time about people who can attract metal to their bodies like a magnet, or whose bodies can withstand very high heat. I have conveyed all of these hypotheses and possibilities to you in an attempt to explain the mysterious story of Esther Cox on the website. I ask our viewers to express their opinion on which hypothesis is closest to the truth or to add more hypotheses.